I was nervous about singing the blues. I was nervous about singing the blues because I'm a church kid.
That's all right.
I'm a church kid that grew up to be a minister. See, every Sunday morning I lead a couple hundred people in singing songs to God, and so I was a little concerned about them coming and hearing me say things like, "I'll be glad when you die."
It's all right. We understand.
See, most churches don't sing the blues. We sing songs like "I Won't Complain." So I could just hear some really spiritual person coming up to me and saying, "Okay, Andre, you might have felt that way one time, but is it right for you to say it out loud?" How do you think God feels about all your cussing and complaining? Well, you might not complain, but I most certainly will. Because as I looked it over, I realized that all God's children sing the blues. I read the poetry of the Old Testament, the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Psalms, the book of Lamentations, and I hear people singing the blues. I hear people wrestling with the deepest human questions, like, is there any point to life in the first place? Why do good people suffer? And where the hell is God in all of this? And it isn't people going behind God's back as though that were possible and saying, well, what's the deal with God? But it's people going right into his presence, right in his face, with their questions, with their accusations. And the writers of these scriptures don't seem to be concerned at all with whether it's right or not to talk about God in this way or to talk to God this way. Because the blues isn't about being right. It's about being real. It's about looking at exactly what the situation is and saying exactly how I feel about it. And the Bible I read shows me that when I sing the blues, God listens. And God responds to my song. That God is moved by the blues. See, the blues is an act of empathy. There's something about you walking into a club and hearing someone on stage sing something that you've actually been through in a room full of people who actually suffered in the same way that you have. And the way I understand the God story is that God watched the course of human history for thousands of years from the beginning of creation and heard mankind singing the blues. He heard mankind singing about pain and suffering and poverty and injustice and violence. And when the time was right, he became a human being to sing along with us. Yeah, in the form of a Jewish carpenter, God sang the blues. Sometimes he'd be walking down the street with his disciples, he'd just break down, start crying, and start singing a song about the beauty that he intended for the world and the condition that it had fallen into. He came to begin healing the world, and the world hurt him. They arrested God. His disciples fled from the scene of the crime. They tortured him, they beat him, they spat on him, they insulted him. They nailed him to a tree, they put a crown of thorns on his head, they stabbed him in the side with a sword, they fed him vinegar to drink, and they jeered at him as they waited for him to die. And Jesus sang the blues. He said, my God, why have you abandoned me? Now, I don't know if you know this, but that very famous quote is actually the first line from a very, very old Hebrew song written by King David. While Jesus was on the cross, he sang the blues. Now, I wonder if when King David wrote that song, anyone said to him, now, David, is it right for you to write songs like that about God? How do you think God feels about all your cussing and complaining? Little did they know that God would sing that song himself thousands of years later. See, like I said, the blues is an act of empathy. If there's anything that the God story tells me, it's that even God knows what it feels like to suffer. No, more than that, even God knows what it feels like to feel like you suffer alone. So how does God feel about my cussing and complaining? My God is a blues man, and I'm not nervous anymore.